This is the sermon that many of you have been waiting for. For our guest, this is the 7th Sunday of our summer series on the 7 deadly sins, those traditional understandings of the broad categories of sin. Each week we have looked at one of the 7, and this morning we get to talk about lust. Some of you are trying really hard not to smile. From Matthew's account in the 5th chapter, the words of Jesus. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Lust. In Bosch's depiction of the 7 deadly sins, when you get to the 7th part of the wheel, he depicts a scene. And frankly, when I saw it, when I was in Madrid, I thought, huh? I was expecting, another painting of Bosch called Regard to Earthly Delights. If you want a little bit of, titillation, go look at that painting. But this one, lust is presented in an entirely different way. Jesus offers a new understanding. In the 5th chapter of Matthew's account of the gospel, we're hearing about Jesus' teachings from what we come to be known as the Sermon on the Mount. And he offers 6 antithetical statements of, you have heard it said, but I say. So he offers a contrast. And in each of these 6, he does something that no one anywhere, either in Scripture or in the writings that have come down to us through the centuries, no one did what he did. Do you know what that is? You're leaning forward. This is great. This morning, we're not talking about sex. I know some of you are disappointed. But this is not about sex. This is something much more. Because in each of these six statements, and I invite you to go read them, the 5th chapter of Matthew for yourself, Jesus says, you have heard it said, which is the correct way of repeating what the Scriptures say. So he is quoting from what we call the Old Testament. That's how rabbis and teachers did it. You have heard it said. And then they would go on and expound upon what that meant. But Jesus does something different here. He said, you have heard it said. And does anyone know what he's quoting? Oh, please. Somebody has to know what Jesus is quoting. The 10 Commandments. Which one? What number is it? Number 7. Anytime the number 7 appears in Scriptures, what? Pay attention. It's important. Okay. So, you have heard it said. They knew the 10 Commandments. It was ingrained on their head. And he says, but. He doesn't say, this is what it means. This is what other rabbis have said before me. This is what your parents have said to you. This is what it means. He says something radical here. And this is what we Christians sometimes forget, that Jesus was a radical. He says, you have heard it said, but I say. He takes the Scripture and expounds its meaning. He says, and I quote, you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. So he reaffirms the teachings of the ancestors. He's not coming and starting a new religion. He's reaffirming the foundations upon which the faith was based. But he does something radical to it. He claims it for himself. He claims that he who is part of the Godhead can enhance it. He makes it radical. Because he doesn't quote somebody else's teachings. He quotes himself. He who was there when the commandment was first issued. And then he gets to the tricky part. When he says, if your eye is causing you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand is causing you to sin, cut it off. Now, for those who want biblical literalism, I wonder how many of us would be blind or maimed today. How many of you have never sinned? Watch for the lightning. Okay, so either you are ignoring Scripture or it means something else. In each of the 6 statements, you have heard it said, but I say. In each of them, he is offering to us a new way of recovering the old teachings. Jesus, in speaking about lust, follows up what I just read with the statement about marriage. Actually, before that, he offers us, well, do you know what the whole Bible is about? I mean, some of you have read it cover to cover, or you've been in Sunday school, or you've sung in the choir, or you've endured enough sermons over the course of your life that hopefully by now you understand what the Bible is about. Does anybody have it figured out? Because if you do, come and let me know, because No. Here's what it's about. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them. Jesus taught that the nature of God is love. Everything in the Scriptures speak to either God's love for creation or how we have misused that love. 6 times Jesus says, you have heard it said, offering up an example of what God's love was supposed to look like, how we were supposed to receive it and act upon it. 6 times he offers an example of how that has not happened in our life. And I wrote them down just so I would not skip a good one. The first time he says, love shows no hostility. You shall not murder. That's why the commandment's there. It doesn't say thou shalt not kill, it says thou shalt not murder. If we harm creation, we are killing God's love. That's what it means. Love is not predatory. You shall not commit adultery. Love builds up. It does not prey upon other people or other aspects of God's creation. Love is faithful. Love is unconditionally truthful. Love does not retaliate. And love extends to our enemies. That's what Christ said. Now, what do we do with it, and what does any of that have to do with lust? If you look at the painting, can you tell me where lust is present? Anyone want to take a stab at it? I mean, it's what, 6 people. I don't know if that's, Renaissance version of camping, but there's a sense, well, no, the one on the right doesn't count. She's in the next town. Yeah. Well, if you think about it, the guy laying down on the left is really close to an unmarried woman. So if any of you are sitting next to an unmarried woman, you might want to scoot away. The woman that is looking at him is not showing modesty. She's actually looking at him. The guy in the white is a musician on the ground. And he's having so much fun that he's dropped his harp. And the other guy is ready to whack him one because he's not playing properly.
Apparently he's not a good musician.
See, I interpret him as lustful.
Yeah.
Look at me.
But look in the far back, under the tent. You have a guy with feathers in his hair. One of those hats that these call macaronis. Talking with a woman in the shadows. But there's no sex involved here. Because lust comes from the Latin word that we also gives us luxury. So lust is as much about craving something beyond our needs. Jesus offers this example of you shall not commit adultery. And with what Bev read about the account of David and Bathsheba, as examples of what happens when we put our mind to something that is not of God, that does not build up the community, that strives after that extravagance. These people in this painting were folks who had everything. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough just to be healthy or content. They wanted more. Well, our culture teaches that, doesn't it? I mean, we're supposed to strive and build up our bank accounts and want good things for our kids and be able to pass on to the next generation more than we had. You have heard it said, but Jesus says, what you should be wanting, what you should be passionate about, is what God wants. Because the Ten Commandments and all the commandments and all the 7 deadly sins all remind us that God is an extravagant God. And that alone is sufficient for the day. In this account, when the disciples heard that for the first time, they responded, who can live up to it? Because that's a standard that none of us, if we're honest, could live up to. If any time you sinned, you had to cut off something. Any time you lived beyond your means, anytime you looked in the Sears wish book, back when they did, you see, we get to a sin like lust. And on the one hand, our culture, when we think about it, we think about it as, scantily clad people and doing all kinds of things. And we think, well, I'm not doing that. My days of being lusted after or lusting are beyond past me. And then we look at someone and say, yeah, but. So what are we supposed to make of this sin? If it's not, strictly speaking, only about sex, but about those desires within us that compel us to seek something besides God. Jesus offers not a mandate, but a way of understanding that it is only through unhuman capacity, only through divine capacity, could we ever stand whole before God. Because in this account, as with each of the other, you have heard it said, but I say, in each one, we are shown that it is not enough to want to be perfect. It is not enough to strive mightily or heroically. You can't do it. So why does Jesus say, pluck out your eye or cut off your hand, if we're not commanded to do it?